Welcome to the Tabletop Gaming Guild. The Tabletop Gaming Guild is all about the experiences and memories that playing board games with friends and family can create. On this episode 10, woo, Nathan goes with the woohoos. We're going to be talking about the worker placement mechanic. There's a lot of games that fall into worker placement, a lot. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to break down the definition. We're going to talk about our top worker placement games, and hopefully that'll give you the idea of what a worker placement game is, if it's something you like, if it's something you know of. Maybe it'll suggest some games you may like to play. Without further ado, let's get going. A worker placement game is any game in which players place one or more pawns to claim the right to do a specific action. Typically, this means that no other player can do the same action that turn, though many games include exceptions to that rule.
The standard worker placement is going to be a Euro game. Starting to be some Ameritrash games that actually use worker placement elements, but it's very, very typical of Euro games.
I'm going to have a couple American publishing games, and some of them I think actually do it in a better manner, but we'll get to that in short. We're going to start off with your host, Nathan, talking about his first worker placement game.
Typical of worker placement and most Euros, there is zero luck in this game. It's completely 100% strategic planning, mapping out your turns in mind ahead without giving away too much of what you're planning. And that game is Russian Railroads. In Russian Railroads, you're building up 3 different train lines to go to different cities in Russia. You can upgrade your train lines to better quality rails, all to get more points. So the higher quality the metal for your rail is, the more point the rails are, and the further along you get on the track with your rail car, the more points you get, and then you get bonuses for hitting certain points with certain things activated. Mainly it's a worker placement combined with an engine builder.
So I'll go on to my pick for a worker placement game, and one of my favorites, and I play constantly with my family, is Boards of Waterdeep. And unlike your game, where you win with points, this game is completely different. You win with victory points. And Lords of Waterdeep belongs to the Forgotten Realms for the D&D lore, although the theme, like most worker placement games or Euro games, is not really there, but it's there enough that it makes the game fun. So it gets that cool art and everything with it. But basically, Lords of Waterdeep is 2 to 5 player, unless you get the expansion, which I believe lets you get up to 7 players. You basically take on the role of a Lord of Waterdeep, which is a hidden role that you get at the beginning of the game that gives you a asymmetric power that no other players have. It sort of like guides you along. So in the game, there's quests that you can complete. There's buildings you can build for points. Play intrigue cards to get points. And what will happen is when you get this Lord, you will get bonus points for performing certain actions. A lot of times, it's like the type of quest that you complete. The way you're going to do it is there's going to be a board laid out, and you're going to place your worker on there, and each area only allows 1 meeple. And when you go to these places, you're going to be collecting cubes. Now, they're actually just cubes, but in the game, they're like clerics, warriors, assassins. Unfortunately, the game has them as cubes, so it's really hard to visualize the white cube as being a cleric and the black cube as being an assassin. But you collect these cubes, and then you can turn these cubes in to complete quests. The game is really quick, super easy to teach. It would be like a mid-weight gateway game. I would think that it's a little more complicated than you would want for someone's first game, but it is great. It's very popular. Its production quality is pretty good, and if you get the expansion, it adds so much more. It adds a corruption track where you can take temporary bonuses, but you get increasing negative points for all the corruption counters you get. So it ends up balancing itself out because towards the end of the game, if you collect a lot of these, you're going to need to be getting rid of them. So instead of taking actions to get more cubes, you're going to be taking actions to get rid of the corruption counters. It also expands out the board too, so it makes it less tight, but updating it to 7 players brings it back down to that super tight board where someone needs to build buildings in order to give more places to it. It's a really, really good game. I highly recommend it. It's been like an evergreen title for a very long time. Lords of Waterdeep is a great worker placement game.
Yeah, it does add a slight random element.
The random elements are going to be basically you start out with 2 quests, 2 intrigue, and your starting lord. So the 2 quests you start out with are random. Your 2 intrigue are random. The quests are super important, but the quests that are available are random, and you have to go to a certain spot to pick them up. In addition, the buildings that come out that you're allowed to choose when you go to Builder's Hall to build, those are all random too. Other than the intrigue cards, all the other players know what's out there. And it's not like you pass the first player token all the way around. There's a space on the board, like with a lot of worker placement games, where you can become the first player. So you actually have control of your own destiny if you see stuff out there. The big variable, though, is the intrigue cards. Your opponents don't get to see them, and they can do nasty stuff like give you a mandatory quest that you have to complete for little to no points before you complete your normal quests. That adds a little bluffing to the game. There's this little spot with only 3 places available to it that let you play the intrigue cards, so it makes those super valuable, so sometimes people rush for them. There's a lot to the game. There is a little bit of a random element to it. I think it adds really highly to the replayability having that random element.
It also makes it more approachable, because one of the major issues with a lot of Euro games and some of the worker placements is because it's pure strategy, there's generally no luck in most Euros. It means that the smartest player, the most experienced player at least, is one that almost always going to win. Whereas when you add a little luck, there's a chance that, this new player that's new to board gaming may actually be this experienced player.
I don't know if that's going to be true for Lords of Waterdeep. What's cool about Lords of Waterdeep is because it does have that random that you're talking about, you do feel like you can. We pretty much played it so much that we have every card and quest memorized. With that, we'll dig for quests and stuff. You wouldn't know that starting out new. But I am going to get into a couple other worker placement games that have far more luck, that get closer to that. But we'll go ahead and let's throw it over to you, and you can do your next one here.
Empires, Age of Discovery. It was formerly called Age of Empires 3 before they had some licensing issues and had to drop the IP. But Age of Empires demonstrates a lot of the strengths of worker placement in that you're taking a very complicated game and making it very teachable, much easier to teach than any other mechanic would have made it. Because with worker placement, you have the advantage of spots on the board where you're placing your units that tell you exactly what you're doing. So everything you need to know is generally written on the board for you. So you don't have to flip through the rule book. You just have to look at the spot you're going and know that's what you're doing. Now, some of them do fall in the trap of having too many options where there's so much to keep track of you forget, but not so much for Empires Age of Discovery. Now, what Age of Discovery does is you essentially have 2 halves of the game. You have the worker placement half, which is one side of the board, where you're going around and putting out your colonists and your captains and your military men, and you're putting them into this worker placement board that'll let you decide whether you want to take them to the colonies, or you want to go gather resources, or you want to hire a more specialist crew. Or you could go for some endgame scoring by buying these special token tiles. Second part of the game, though, is after you've done all your worker placement, decide where you want to go, you then take those actions. And those actions, a lot of them have to do with this map of the North and South America and the colonies there, and you're bringing units over from the worker placement area and using that to bring them onto these colonies. And that part becomes an area control game. So having the most colonists in an area gives you lots and lots of points and extra resources, and that's really where the end game scoring is. Most of it's coming from colonizing, but the worker placement is how you get it there.
So that's sort of like a hybrid thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's also very nice production value. Beautiful old-style map on the board, and everything's very clearly laid out. It's a large board, so you have plenty of space to work with, can clearly see what you're doing, and you don't have to worry about all your pieces getting mushed up and clustered. And it's a really nice-looking game.
I get distracted by the fact that you have gaps in your game shelf.
Yes, I have them all over the place. Constantly digging into my games trying to find a specific game. Actually, most of the gaps are just one game. Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, there's 7 boxes for that.
Oh yeah, that's huge, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and go on to my next game, which is one of my favorite worker placement games. Basically, it is like Lords of Waterdeep with luck. So it is called Champions of Midgard. Sort of middleweight, Viking-themed worker placement game with dice rolling. In Champions of Midgard, basically what you're trying to do is you're going to try to take out monsters and get different sets of monsters. There's Draugrs, you're going to take them out and get different sets of them. And you also have a troll that you got to take out. You can build ships That'll also give you points, and there's also different objective things that you can meet to get points. But the bulk of the points in it is going to be going out and killing monsters. Now in this game, you're going to go and you're going to use the different worker placement spots to do each of these things. So you're going to go out and you're going to collect Vikings, of which you're only allowed to have up to 8. So you have to manage the pool of dice that you get. In the base game, you have 3 different types of dice, and each of them have different hits on them and all different amounts of blank sides. Some of them have shields on them. The Axemen, for example, which is the black dice, don't have any shields on them, but they have the highest amount of hits. And what you're going to do is you're going to collect these warriors, you're going to collect wood, you're going to collect meat, and you're going to take these resources, and you're going to attempt to kill these different monsters. Now in the game, one of the cruxes is if someone doesn't go to the troll space to take out the troll and take the troll out, everyone gets a blame token. However, if one of the players takes out that troll, they can take one of their blame tokens and give it to another player. So there is that portion of the game where people will tend to want to go there because the amount of negative points you get per blame token increases. So there's a good push and pull in there. You don't necessarily want to take out the troll because you don't get that great of a reward. You want to take out the draugrs, which give you really good points, or you want to venture across the ocean to take out the monsters, which are a lot harder to take out because you need to get a ship, you need to have meat to feed your people while they travel across, plus the sea can be dangerous. The typical problem is they don't like the fact that you're rolling dice to resolve the combat. So you take these Viking resources you get in, you roll them to determine whether you can defeat the monster. You can lose your combat and lose all your Vikings. Now I'll say, even with really horrible rolls, I have never lost a combat in this game ever. The issue with the game is a lot of people like to just do the minimal and try to push their luck and get the most points spread out. But it can be very devastating when you realize you've lost this combat, you've lost all the people on the ship that you just went to fight the monster, and you didn't get anything. So there's that. I think there's a learning curve in the game, and so it is one of those entry-level-ish games that you would get into after playing a couple other ones that could turn you off on the game. I don't know if you've played Champions of Midgard, Nathan?
Yeah, I played it with you, actually.
Oh, that's right. What did you think of Champions of Midgard?
Yeah, I did quite enjoy it. It's thematically very different than Waterdeep, but in some ways it has very similar feel. There is an expansion out, the Valhalla expansion, that does a lot to mitigate the loss for taking big risks and kind of encourages people to take big risks.
Yeah, the Valhalla expansion definitely answered people's dislike of not being able to max out all the areas and lose these combats, and it gave you tokens that you could use to gain more points. So it's pretty nice. You lost your guys, but you got tokens.
And then you can use your dead guys in Valhalla.
Yeah, the tokens you get from your dice dying are what you use in the Valhalla area to claim your prize. There's a little push and pull with that too because you have to have a certain combination. You're trying to get that combination before your opponents grab that spot and take that one. So, really cool expansion. I also like the Mountains expansion that adds a 5th player and also adds an extra die and a couple extra monsters. I like the game at 4 players, but the size of my family, a lot of times we need to have 5-player games in. And I think I could probably get it back to the table if I can get the 5th player in there.
So I have a controversial one to talk about.
Monopoly is not a worker placement game.
No, and I would never even consider that as a passable game for this show. Mine's controversial in other ways. The one I have on my list combines worker placement with legacy.
I hate Charterstone. I mean, Charterstone is a fine game. It's fine. I was just expecting to, when I got the game, and I was super excited because it's a legacy worker placement game by Jamie Stegmaier, which I love just about everything he's ever came out with. And I got the game, and it is a super, super, super entry-level worker placement game. But I'm stealing your thunder from you, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. It is fairly entry-level. It does lean more heavily on the legacy element.
Also, the candle's really, really dumb.
There's a decent story on this. I can't go into too much detail. And I do like games with stories. Something to reveal, something hidden that you don't know until later what's going to happen. Because you're constantly adding stickers to the board. You get new worker placement spots. You can cover up old ones or replace them. Downside of that is balancing can be an issue because it's not a pre-planned worker placement. Everything's kind of going out randomly however you happen to draw and what you decide to build. So you can kind of unbalance the game by doing very well and building the best buildings in your area. True, people can use your area, but they have to pay you a marginal cost to do that. But it's still good for you, even if you got the best buildings, people are constantly using your area and giving you a lot of resources. So it does have that drawback of it can get really unbalanced, but, it can be a very good game. And unlike most legacies, after you finish playing this, you can continue playing it with the finished board. Now, if it's gotten to the point where it's kind of gotten unbalanced, you may have to buy one of those recharge packs. These recharge packs that have stickers so you can essentially play the game again. But you can always flip over the board and reset all the worker placement areas and actually make a more balanced worker placement game out of it.
I don't know. When I played it, I was very disappointed. And I probably ruined it because one of the things I did in it was to prove that no one could ever beat me in the game, which they couldn't at the point that I had it set up, is I ensured that no one else's combo could be built in their area, period. I had a pumpkin combo that gave me exorbitant amounts of points by just going around and going through 3 different spots in my own area. And one of the things what actually let me do is I could build a building. And without giving something away, there's a way that I can build away buildings. So I would build the building, and if it completed any engine that would have worked in their area, I would snag it up, build it, and then either build over top of it in the same game, or never place the building back in ever. So basically what ended up happening is, since there is no real catch-up mechanic in the game, and by doing that each game, I was able to creep farther and farther ahead to the point where it was ridiculous.
But you can't build over top of other buildings until one of the late scenarios.
So basically, there's no spoiler in here. In every game like this, the buildings get better. And at a certain point, there's going to be the top buildings that you can build to build the perfect sort of engine. And at that point of the game, you can do bad things to people. And I think that's actually probably midway through.
I thought that was, yeah, it can change a lot, but I think for us it was 3/4 of the way through.
We went super quick because what we ended up doing in the beginning is we built everything like crazy.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You kind of cheated because you got a rule wrong and you built a lot more than you're technically allowed to.
No, that wasn't what we got wrong.
Sure.
We were allowed to build everything that we built. Within Game 2, we had every single square possible filled.
Yeah, I remember that shouldn't have been possible.
It is if all you do is get your resources, go to the area, build the thing, get your resources, go to the area, build the thing. And the thing that helps out with that and makes it even faster is if everyone else is doing the same thing, you boot their meeple so they can get their resources and they boot your meeple.
After recording this episode, we discussed Charterstone a little further and realized the real difference in our experience with the game was largely due to player count. So I played this game with 3 players, and Jim played it with the max of 6. And the more players you have in this, the more the issues are exacerbated. There's a lot more potential for min-maxing with larger player counts, with getting super combinations. Whereas in a 3-player game, these really powerful combinations may not come up. They're far less likely to come up. So the game tends to be a little bit more balanced with the 3 players, or significantly more balanced with 3 players. With 3 players, you have far lower chance of having major unbalancing occur, and the game tends to be overall slower paced in a good way. With 6 players, things are happening fast. You're running out of things to do pretty quickly, and the unbalancing can happen super fast. So overall, we'd say with 3 or 4 players, this game works well. With 5 or 6, don't even try it. Oftentimes with worker placements, you want that tightness with where you have to fight over options. Not in this game, because the unbalancing just breaks it.
All in all, for the price point, it's worth it for $30. You get metal coins and stuff inside of it, so it's great. Don't expect, like I did, super heavy worker placement game.
No, it definitely leans more heavily on the legacy element.
Or the light end of the worker placement. There's never anything that gets crazy.
It's just constantly changing. And that's what the draw is for me.
The thing that make it work, if anything, is the fact that you're opening new things and discovering stuff. That's why I don't think you hear very many people play it after they can beat the legacy campaign, because that is the game.
Right.
I have a friend that bought it 3 times because they played it 3 times, but it was different each time because of what you have to discover and unlock and the different combinations and stuff you did it with.
Yeah, there's so many cards in it. The chance of getting through every card in one playthrough is very, very, very small.
Yeah, I think you could easily get through one tree of buildings.
Yeah.
Charterstone.
So that was Charterstone.
So angry I forgot my next game. I'm not going to do the one because I know you're going to do it. So we are going to do... Oh my gosh, we're just going to say Uwe Rosenberg.
Yeah, pretty much all of his games.
So if you're not familiar, he did like Agricola, Caverna, Feast for Odin. All those games, super awesome worker placement games. If you like worker placement games and you haven't played one of those 3 games, you're almost mandatory that you have to play one of those 3 games.
I'd say if you haven't played one of those games, you probably are not that into worker placement.
Well, I mean, the price point's a little high.
That's true.
So depending on what you're going to do, I mean, most of the games I've talked about already are $40 or under. The thing is, if you had to pick one of them, the way that I would categorize them is Agricola is more of a super tight worker placement game that is punishing. So with Agricola, the biggest part of the game is to be able to make your farm area and prevent from getting negative points and getting certain quantities of everything to get positive points. But the thing that really drives Agricola is feeding your people. Feeding your people efficiently is the key to Agricola. So if you feed your people efficiently, you'll be able to make your farm efficient, and if you can do that, you will get a lot of amount of points. People that criticize the game is the fact that this feeding mechanism is in the game. They think it's very punishing. It is if you don't consider it a major component of the game. Next would be Caverna, which adds like a fantasy type theme to it with dwarves, and your home is a cave. Basically, you still have your fields like Agricola, but in the cave you can actually excavate out areas, you can build different rooms in your cavern to gain points and stuff. And in this game, it's super easy to feed your people, to the point where if you can't feed your people, you did something super wrong, because you should be able to do it without much effort. So the focus shifted from Agricola, which is you had to pay attention to the game more with the feeding your people and that element to make your engine efficient. With Caverna, it was more of making your board the most efficient way you can. And there's so many options on the board that you can play completely different every single time. And it added like a questing element that you can upgrade your dwarves into warriors with higher and higher armor ratings. It's really cool. So there's all sorts of options in Caverna. And then Feast for Odin made it even more ridiculously easy to being almost not a part of the game. Or Feast for Odin is 100% on the efficiency of the board that you're creating. You have a ton of options, you have a ton of things you different do, but the key of the game is the making the board have the placement of the tiles as efficient as possible to negate negative points and gain positive points. So Feast for Odin's on the completely opposite side, and Agricola's on the other, but they're all great worker placement games. I don't think you can mess up with any of them, but basically that is the thematic difference and the play difference between all 3.
Yeah, and as you said, these are definitely on the pricier end, so, if you're not really sure, haven't really played too many worker placements, you might want to try these first, because, Feast for Odin's $90. Caverna has gone down in price significantly. It's now down to $75. It was about $100 before. Agricola's not too bad though. $50 about for Agricola now. So those prices are dropping. Agricola's the oldest one, so that's why it's dropped so much.
Yeah, and Agricola you would be most likely to be able to find somewhere used or whatnot for pretty cheap. So that would probably be the one you can get for the least amount of money and have the most readily available copies everywhere. The replayability on Agricola is just insane. In Caverna, you just had an expansion come out which actually adds more fantasy element to it and asymmetric powers, which none of the other ones have asymmetric powers. Well, with the exception of occupations in Agricola, and the Caverna expansion is called The Forgotten Folk, and it's actually a fan-inspired expansion. Yeah, Feast for Odin has a brand new expansion that adds even more bits to it. The cool thing about the Feast for Odin expansion is people are saying it fixed a lot of issues that they didn't even know existed with the game. So that shows you how much there is in that game that they couldn't even figure out what was broken with it because of how deep the game is until they got the expansion that explained to them what was broken in the game, which is really cool. So I have talked about technically 3 worker placement games with multiple expansions. I should let Nathan talk about a worker placement game now.
So the one that I think you were thinking about, that you said I might steal from you, is Pillars of the Earth?
Nope.
Okay. That I'm probably not stealing from you. But Pillars of the Earth 2006, so it's a fairly old game at this point. Pillars of the Earth takes a fairly standard worker placement and adds a couple interesting elements. Now, the whole core of this game is you're trying to build a cathedral. You only have a couple turns. It's relatively short for a worker placement at 90 to 120 minutes, so it doesn't seem like it goes that long. I think we usually play it at about an hour and a half. But the thing that it adds that's interesting is the turn order track. So you have this bag of workers that you're pulling out of, and when you pull out a worker to determine turn order, you place it on this track, and it determines how much you have to spend to take your turn. So you could say, okay, I don't want to spend that much, I'll pass. The next person draws, and the price gets less and less. Until somebody finally says, okay, I'm taking their turn, and they pay their price, take their turn, and then continue on from where you left off. The price gets cheaper and cheaper. Eventually, you've gotten down to 0, it loops around again, so all the people that passed didn't want the higher price get to take their actions for free. Unfortunately, it's worker placement, so, there's only a limited number of spaces on the board, so, the actions you wanted to take may all be gone by then. And your actions consist of things like going to the market to buy resources, going and getting immunity from taxes.
Yeah, it's definitely a really good game. It got overshadowed by some of my other worker placement games, so it hasn't seen much play. But it's a game I'm going to keep for a long time because it is very solid.
It was also out of print for a very long time because of rights issues, with the name being linked to a very popular literary work. A lot of board gamers probably would not have been familiar with that. So yeah, it may have been hard to justify the expense of the IP for that one.
Now I'm going to talk about a game that I really, really like. And I don't understand why people complain about Champions of Midgard, but don't complain about this game. Although I like both of them a lot. And that game is Stone Age. In Stone Age, it's a 100% Paleolithic game where you're basically trying to gather resources and build huts and gather technology card sets to gain points throughout the game. In this game, there is a lot of dice rolling. However, your rolling can be mitigated by axes. So you gain different axe levels, and you can have up to 3 on your board, and you can use these before you roll to add to the number. So let's say you're trying to get wood. And wood, you're going to roll your dice, and then you're going to divide by 3, I think, and that's how many wood you get. You can use your axes to mitigate the roll by adding a number to the roll before you roll. So let's say I have 4 axes, and I roll 3 dice, and I roll 3. Well, I added 4 to the roll, so I'm guaranteed to get 2 wood. And then you can spend those to gain your huts and stuff like that. And that game also has a feature people mechanism in it too. The only way that you're going to have issue with food is if you're gaining more people. And if you gain more people, you have to have more food. So if you get into the hole with Stone Age, it's your own fault. Now, I know there's actually a strategy where you don't care about feeding your people and take negative points the entire time. But that's not really, I don't think, in the spirit of the game.
I would say that I heard people complain about this game, mainly because there's just a lot of dice rolling, but you do have plenty of ways to mitigate. As you were saying, you can do the hammers and add to your roll, or you can just mitigate it by having more and more babies to get more and more workers.
Yeah, you get points for the workers, too. So a lot of time what ends up happening is you have so many workers left over from all the spaces that got taken that when you go to get resources, you put more than you actually need. So, like, if you roll and you get 2 wood, you really don't care because you only need 1. So you're like, wow, I got 2. All right, great. So that's also part of the game. So once you get towards the end, you get so many workers that you can afford to throw them at things to guarantee you get certain things and use the axes. You get to the point where you get so many resources that sometimes you have a hard time translating those into points, which drops your efficiency and your score in the game. The only negative thing that I have with the game at all, which I don't mind randomness in a worker placement game, is the dice cup. The dice cup smells like a dead animal. I thought it was my box that smelled like a dead animal with the dice cup, but then I found out that everyone's freaking dice cup smells like a dead animal. So, I like the game. Get a different dice cup when you buy it.
Apparently they fixed that with the 10th anniversary edition.
Yeah, the 10th anniversary edition looks really cool. It has like a winter theme to it and non-dead rat smelling dice cup, which is good. The gameplay wasn't changed at all. It was just thematically, it has like a skinning over top of it of a winter sort of thing. So just remember, the big upgrade on the reprint is no rat smelling cup.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's how they're advertising it, but yeah,
No, like,
that is a
dead rat free. I don't know why they even thought to put a leather cup in there, because that has to be super expensive. I don't know if it just came out of the tanning area or something, where they just no, so bad.
They did also add a hunting element. You know, animal cards that you can put out. It's semi-cooperative, so you can put people onto these hunting cards, and when you fill up all the spots on the hunting card, you kill the animal and you divide up the resources from that animal. So it adds an interesting element.
I'm sure that's not the expansion.
Yeah, it was the expansion that was included, yes.
Because the expansion was super hard to get. It has a super weird name for the original.
Yeah, they changed the name. Something about style, the element of style.
Yeah, so I'm looking at BGG for the expansion of Stone Age, and I know it was called something like Fashion is the Thing or something, like really, really dumb. And even on Board Game Geek, they changed the name to Stone Age, the expansion, which is infinitely better than what it was called.
Just calling it the expansion is better than... Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's 100% true. Because
I think it was the style is the goal.
It was originally called The Style is the Goal, and they renamed it to The Expansion, which is so much better. I don't like when they include the name expansion in the expansion name, but that was still better.
But I like it even less when that is entirely new name and you can accidentally buy it, think it's a different game. You know, I've done that a couple times. I've bought games and there was nothing to tell me in the sale page that it was an expansion, and then I realized I can't play this game.
Okay, so here is a line from the manual, the description of the game that they didn't remove when they named it the expansion. Now they sit around the fire, gaze in wonder at the tribal matriarch, and wonder how could they look as good as her? My tooth just hanging. Honey, I also want something to make my skin look good. That is a line from the introduction of the expansion.
Why?
I don't think you can get much worse than that, but if you can get past the ridiculousness that is that, it's a good expansion. I like to think, why is my tooth just hanging? What the heck? Yeah, the expansion did include a new location for the village. Add new cards, new huts, and components that allow the gameplay to play up to 5 Stone Age hunter-gatherers with hanging teeth and rat-smelling dice cups.
So yeah, that's Stone Age. Stone Age is an introductory level worker placement.
So Nathan, what is your next worker placement game?
There's one that I just got to the table, and it's controversial whether you'd consider it a worker placement. It definitely has some elements there that it's co-opted and made its own. And that's Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea.
What? How's that a worker placement game? That's more like an area control, sort of like Blood Rage feel, right?
To some degree. Combat is so far to a minimum. I have all the expansions, so I have not tried any expansions yet. But it's more about getting your workers out, gathering resources, and I've put this on the list because I've heard people call it worker placements, but it's a little bit of a stretch in that you're placing workers to take actions, and when somebody places that worker to take an action, you can follow their action. So it's more of an action selection with workers.
I think it's more like you're just placing a worker, because isn't that on your own mat?
Yeah, you're placing a worker to select an action, but it's not preventing somebody else from taking that action. In fact, it allows them to follow that action with one of their workers.
I almost think that is like a Puerto Rico-style mechanism of role selection.
Yeah, it's action selection with ability to follow somebody's action. You do have worker spots on the board to get bonus resources. So when I was playing, I was like just trying to figure out how are people calling this a worker placement and how does it fit? I can kind of see where they're coming from. And, well, I should talk about the game, I suppose. It's a 4X game. So you're exploring, you're exploiting, you're expanding, you're exterminating. So you're exploring because you have tokens on the map that when you go to different areas, there's things you can find. So it could be a cave that you find goods in, or it could be on the sea, you might run into a pirate ship that attacks your ship. All sorts of different things. You might run into a wizard's tower and get some spells from him. A lot of things you can find. Expand your, going into the different regions, getting your workers there so you can get resources from them, but you're also the exploit element as well. You're gathering resources from the land. Then you can also go into other people's territories and wipe them out. And combat is actually kind of interesting in this game. It's somewhat turn-based combat. What happens in combat is you count the value of your units. Then each person can play a spell if they can pay the cost. And you can also play counter spells for those Then you get to determine what your tactics are for your army. And those add bonuses, and some of those counter other ones. So, like, if you're the attacker, you can siege the person, but if you expect them to siege, so you can build barricades, which gives you a defensive bonus specifically against the siege card. So there's a lot of interesting elements there.
Yeah, Heroes of Land and Sea is definitely one of my top games I want to play, just because I like the area control style combat type games. And that falls in my genre of, like, I want to play Blood Rage, I want to play Rising Sun, I want to play Heroes, Land, and Sea. I want to play all those, so I'm really excited to eventually be able to play that game.
The base game is a 4-player game, but with all the expansions, it goes up to a 7-player game. So that might be one I have to bring down so we can play the 7 players.
That would work out real great. So I'm going to do something a little odd. I'm going to explain one of the best worker placement games ever made. I'm going to briefly describe 2 other worker placement games to work up to why this game is awesome.
Okay.
So one of the games is called Automatia. In Automatia, you're basically playing a car salesman / tycoon person. And basically in Automatia, what you're trying to do is you're trying to have certain car types built to meet the market to get the most amount of points. It's a okay worker placement game, but one of the really cool mechanisms the game introduced was that if someone else took the place that you wanted, you can also play a worker there. You just have to pay a minimal fee.
Mm-hmm.
Super easy, nice, great. The game itself was okay. Another game that did it that I really do like is Viticulture. In Viticulture, you're basically playing as a vineyard owners, and you're basically taking your grapes and you're taking different types of wine, and you're trying to satisfy contracts and get different wine connoisseurs into your area for points. But in Viticulture, which is a Jamie Stegmaier game, one I like that isn't Charterstone, what's cool of that is you have an El Grande worker. Once per season, you can put this worker down anywhere, even if there's another meeple there. So that whole plan that I had where everything was pivoting on the one spot, if I keep my Grande worker, I'm ensuring that I can do that, which I think is really, really cool. Another game that does something similar is going to be Istanbul. Istanbul is a basic game where you have one worker and a whole bunch of assistants. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to move this worker around the board. You can go with your worker to the place where another player is. You just have to pay them for the spot. So sort of like Automania. The difference is in Istanbul, it's not really all into the worker placement thing because you really only have one worker. The game I'm going to be talking about, which I think is a highly underrated game that does worker placement like really, really well, is called Spirium. In Spirium, it's set in an alternate world in England, steampunk-based universe where you're trying to gather Spirium. What I think really happened with this game is people were like, I don't really want a game about the industrial age where we're getting black coal. How can we make this look cool? We're going to keep the same picture of someone getting coal, but then we're going to paint the coal green and pretend it's Spirium. So the theme is obviously getting coal in the industrial age. That part doesn't matter. I think the game is awesome. So basically in this game, you're going to get a grid of 9 cards that you can hand down. You can place your worker around these cards. The cool thing is, you can place as many of the workers as you want around these cards. And each turn, you're going to go around the table, and each player is going to do one of the actions, either place a worker, or take off a worker, or fire off one of their factories or other cards. And what's going to happen is as soon as you start taking off workers, you can no longer place workers. Why that's important is each one of these buildings, you can buy them or get something from them. If you take your worker off to either buy, get, or get money from it, but if you take it off to get the resource that's on there or buy the card, you have to add to your price every single meeple that is around that card. If you take your card off to get money, you get money for every single meeple that's around it too. So it's a really cool dynamic in the game. The other really cool fun part is if everyone's getting greedy around an area and you take your meeple off and you buy the adjacent property, and then the next player takes their meeple off and buys away the area that everyone's around, their workers are considered used and they return to the player. So there's a push your luck element to it because you don't want to get too greedy around an area and have someone buy that property out from underneath you and the adjacent one and lose all your meeples for the round. I can't undersell the game. It is awesome. It is so streamlined. It's super fast. It's in a small box, so it's highly portable. I think the cover art and the lack of marketing made it not sell very well, but you can still get it for like 35-ish bucks or 40 bucks. It's well worth it. It is an awesome worker placement game.
Yeah, I gave that one a 6.
Well, no one's perfect. Yeah, sometimes you're wrong.
It was a decent game. I don't know, something about it just didn't quite grab me. Maybe it was a little too brain burnery for me. I don't know.
I don't know if it's too brain burning. You stop by, I will bust it out and play another couple games of it.
Another one I very much enjoy is Manhattan Project. No, Manhattan Project has a slightly controversial subject. It's handled pretty well. It's basically you're doing research and developing bombs, and you get extra points if you load these nuclear weapons onto planes, have them ready to launch. And you can also bomb other people's plants, and although that's a fairly minor element in the game, it's not done a whole lot. It is a worker placement where you have various actions you can take on the base board, but you can also buy cards that you can put on your player board that give you your own personal worker placement. However, there is an action on the main board that allows you to use somebody else's player board, or an action on their player board. So there's a lot of interesting elements there. The thing I did like the most about it is your action consists of either placing a worker down to take an action, or actually you can place more than one worker. If you're playing interesting on your player board, you can actually put multiples down. But you're either placing workers or you're pulling them all back. But as soon as you're pulling them all back, you're opening up spots for other people to use. You kind of have to judge, when do I want to actually draw my people back? I always thought that was a kind of an interesting element to add.
It is definitely a good game. It's definitely one that I want to play more. I only ever played it once.
Yeah, I want to wrap up by saying I love worker placements. And, well, there aren't really any worker placements that made my top 10 list. There are many, many, many worker placements that I love. I was just going through the BGG listing. It's like, I'm going scrolling down the list. I played all these games. I love all these games. Like in the top 10, I've played 9 of the top 10 worker placements. I own 8 of them. And the only reason why I don't own the 9th one is because you have it and I can play it anytime I visit you.
That's true.
But yes, I love worker placements. One of my favorite mechanisms.
Yeah, worker placements are by far my favorite mechanism of any game. The second one up is area control. Worker placements, I play them more often than any other game that I have in my collection.
As I said earlier, it's definitely a good way of making a complex game much more approachable. It's much easier to teach because, in general, a lot of the information is on the board and visible for everyone to see. You don't have to constantly reference the rule books and get into the nitty-gritty. It's there for you to see.
I completely agree. So one of the things I wanted to talk about before we close also would be we're going to start to do more interviews, so hopefully you'll see more of those in the future. In addition, we set up a Patreon page, so if you like what you hear, you can throw us a couple bucks. Everything helps to get better audio equipment, to pay for the server, the website, all that fun stuff. If you're interested, you can go to tabletopgamingguild.com and you can click on the Support Us link, and everything's appreciated. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, join our BGG Guild, guild number 2989, or you could join our guild by going to tabletopgamingguild.com/guild. You can also join our Slack channel where we're going to discuss board game related topics and our next podcasts. You can also visit our website, tabletopgamingguild.com, and you can email us at tabletopgamingguild@gmail.com. The Tabletop Gaming Guild podcast is a product of Tabletop Gaming Guild, LLC. All rights reserved. Thanks again for listening.